Nanaimo Ladysmith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise again to describe the abandoned vessel that sank in Ladysmith Harbour, the 90-foot, 100-year-old Anapaya. It was on Transport Canada's vessel inventory of concern since 2014. It had been identified as a risk to sink. And when it went down, after being overwhelmed by rain, the bilge pumps could not keep up. The Coast Guard, bless them, did take action, boomed the wreck, contained the oil spill, so important for Ladysmith Harbour because we've got shellfish jobs at risk from even the smallest oil spill. So the Coast Guard did act, which we're very grateful for. And then they lifted this 90-foot long, beautiful old wooden boat off the bottom of the harbour, with everybody saying the whole way along it would have been much easier to have prevented the boat from sinking in the first place. And so a significant takeaway for me afterwards was that the previous owners, and in fact the people who had been living on the Anapaya, they knew that she was nearing the end of her life, and they said afterwards, I mean, she was an abandoned boat by the time that she sank, but the previous owners said if there had been somewhere we could have taken that boat, we didn't have the economic means to prevent her from sinking, but if we could have had a vessel turn-in program, the same way that Oregon State and Washington State have very successfully used to get at the backlog of abandoned vessels and to prevent them from sinking and becoming a problem in the first place. This was a significant element of my abandoned vessel legislation, C-352, which famously was blocked in this House the first time this has ever happened to a bill, and we went through all the appeals. We're told that it was the Liberal majority that squashed it in the end. But the interesting thing is, now that we're studying the Transport Minister's Bill, C-64, at committee, I've been able to ask all kinds of witnesses, don't they wish that a vessel turn-in program was still part of the legislative offer that Canadians had? I mean, and it makes sense. It had been proposed by local governments in British Columbia for many, many years, and it was on that basis that I included it in my legislation, C-352. So just in the last few days even, we've had testimony from Troy Wood, the manager of the derelict vessel removal program in Washington State, saying that for them, the vessel turn-in program was their prevention arm of their very successful derelict vessel removal program. Sarah Angel, the president of the National Marine Manufacturers Association, also said, there isn't a place to take the boats before they become a hazard. For her industry, which is significantly made up of vessel manufacturers, but also marina operators, they said they would really welcome the opportunity to create a viable recycling program, and there needs to be a place to take them. We also heard from Kyle Murphy from Washington State, from Peter Luckham, chair of Islands Trust Council, and Anna Johnson from West Coast Environmental Law, and Georgia Strait Alliance had said very clearly that in the Transport Minister's bill, they are left wondering about the absence of a voluntary turn-in program which could deal with this backlog and help vessel owners who don't have the means to dispose of them responsibly to do the right thing. So I ask through you, Mr. Speaker, to the government, why did they not include a vessel turn-in program in their legislation to solve abandoned vessels?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Transport.
I'd like to thank the honourable member for her question and for her concern for her and many other coastal communities. I'm proud to be here today to talk about the actions this government has taken to address the important issue of abandoned and wrecked vessels, an issue affecting many communities across Canada. Our government has been looking at the best practices on the issue of abandoned and wrecked vessels. We have considered these carefully and have adopted the elements that make the most sense for Canada into a national strategy on abandoned and wrecked vessels. The strategy was announced as part of our unprecedented $1.5 billion Ocean Protection Plan in November of 2016. In May and September of 2017, 2 funding programs for the removal and disposal of small priority boats were launched, including one with a public education component and a vessel recycling and design research component. We worked with other levels of government to identify options to improve vessel ownership, identification systems, and initiated a study on identifying gaps in our vessel registration systems for large vessels. We've worked with the Canadian Coast Guard to develop a national inventory of abandoned and wrecked vessels and a methodology to assess the risk associated with these vessels. We've also been engaging Canadians in discussions on options, how to create a robust polluter pay approach for future vessel cleanup with owner-financed funds. And very importantly, on October 30th, 2017, our government tabled Bill C-64, the Wrecked, Abandoned or Hazardous Vessels Act, the key legislative component of our plan. Bill C-64 is extremely comprehensive in its approach to tackling the issue of wrecked, abandoned or hazardous vessels. The proposed legislation would bring the Nairobi International Convention on the Removal of Wrecks into Canadian law and strengthen vessel owner liability. It would address irresponsible vessel management, including a prohibition on abandonment, and it would enhance federal powers to take proactive action on problem vessels. We will continue to collaborate with provincial, territorial, and municipal governments, Indigenous groups, and coastal communities to implement our comprehensive national strategy on abandoned and wrecked vessels, and we look forward to all members' support of Bill C-64 as it goes through the parliamentary process to implement this important legislation that will help protect our coasts and shores. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well, member for Nanaimo, Ladysmith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think maybe my friend opposite didn't hear my first 4 minutes of my speech. There is lots to support in the Transport Minister's Bill C-64, but it's missing the entire program that I've just described, and I haven't heard any rationale from the government about why they're leaving it out. It was described by the Washington State Derelict Vessel Removal Program, which has been in operation 15 years, as now an integral part of their prevention program. Knowing that there's nothing in the Transport Minister's bill to deal with the backlog of abandoned vessels, why will will the government accept the amendment that I'm going to propose in committee to introduce a voluntary turn-in program for abandoned vessels to deal with the backlog?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, our government has heard the concerns of Canadians, asking for a more robust and comprehensive approach to address the issue of wrecked, abandoned or hazardous vessels. On October 30th, we did introduce the Wrecked, Abandoned or Hazardous Vessel Act, or Bill C-64. The legislation is intended to protect coastal and shoreline communities, the environment and infrastructure. The proposed legislation will fill gaps within our legislative system by making owners legally responsible for their vessels that reach end of life. Ultimately, it's about prevention, helping to reduce future occurrences of wrecked, abandoned, and hazardous vessels and the impacts of those that do occur. We invite all members to support this innovative and important bill as it goes through the parliamentary process. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.